Good evening and welcome to the Imagine series, our monthly conversations with our community's creatives, innovators, artists. And tonight I'm really excited because I have a good friend of mine, Reily, who has been serving as the director of the Speed Art Museum for about 4 years now.
4 years next week.
Next week.
Yeah.
And Stephen, you're coming to the end of your leadership there. You're going to be stepping out, and so I'd love to just have a conversation today about kind of lessons learned and thinking about the past 4 years, really zeroing in on the last year.
Yep.
And having a chance to just kind of gain some of your wisdom as you think about the reflections.
You can help me on transition planning too.
Right, we've got to be thinking about this. We've just hit the past year of really the time when the world turned upside down because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Talk me through what the Speed, how the Speed made decisions about closing, and then really some of the things that you all learned through this last year in your decreased capacity, but I'm thinking about that time.
Yeah. Well, thank you. You're right. We actually had a series of events last year our colleagues organized to figure out how to have a period of reflection on this anniversary, because I'm always aware we decided to close the Speed for the pandemic on March 13th. What we didn't know at the time was earlier that morning, Breonna Taylor had been killed in her apartment. And so I feel like we have been on this double course, this flowing, unpredictable, challenging river of both of those pandemics, challenges. I think about the year as arts organizations. I don't think arts organizations ever thought they were completely different, but I think we all thought like we're our own creatures. And last year, I think all of that broke open. And I think because one, it turns out we were just like other organizations. I talked to a coach I work with. He said the issue is every single company, organization he was dealing with, nonprofit, for-profit, was dealing with the same things for once and for the first time ever. So we were dealing with layoffs and furlough decisions. We were transitioning to work from home. We were trying to support our colleagues who have young children who were suddenly not able to go to school. And so, we are suddenly like of the community, I think in a different way, super challenging, but just like our donors, just like our corporate sponsors. And at the same time, we had to answer to the same questions that we didn't get a pass. Not that we were asked for one, but we had to answer, how are we reflecting our commitments to racial equity and justice? How are we stepping up? How are we being transparent? Nothing was spared. And then, of course, ultimately, it turns out we aren't that different. An arts organization is a social service organization.
Absolutely.
And I know at first I was feeling very humbled because, we weren't saving lives. We don't directly solve issues of racial inequity or policing or legal solutions. But it turns out if we aren't playing our role, then we can't survive. And so I actually feel exhausted. And like this year has really made us, if we weren't ready to be of the community, in the community, serving the community, we were called to that over the last year.
Absolutely. It's interesting, some of the things we learned to do so quickly.
Yeah.
Kind of like the digital, content. It would have taken us another few years to figure out, how are we going to get to that? And we, the Speed figured it out in the matter of a week or 2 weeks,
everybody.
And all of a sudden it was like, we know how to show up in a different way now.
Yeah. Digital is the big one, but it's so common that you're right. But it was one, when we had that meeting on March 13th about closing the museum, there's something so depressing. If you're running an arts organization, your mission is to open your doors, bring people in, expose them to art, fill seats with people to have their lives transformed, get a break, think about the future, and we couldn't do it. But when we said, now we're going to do digital, it was the one moment I left work that day saying, there's going to be something exciting about this. And I needed, like you, I'm a can-do kind of person. And I didn't just want to shut down my organization. I was like, we will figure, and this will be fun. And we've been waiting to figure this out. Now we get to.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things that I've been so inspired by as I look back on the last year, is many of our peers around the country institutions, whether they're visual art institutions or performing arts, they hibernated.
Yeah.
You know, they closed their doors.
Right.
And they said, we're going to conserve cash and we'll be back when this is all over.
Yeah.
And in Louisville, our organizations
Right.
said, this community needs us more than ever.
Yeah.
And that means that we have to show up in different ways, and we have
Yeah.
to continue to serve, we have to continue to drive our mission, but we can't do it the way we've always done
Right.
it or the way we did it yesterday. And so it's been so exciting to see how organizations like the Speed have said, how do I deliver on my mission when I can't bring people inside of my building?
Right. You're right. And of course, we feel so lucky because by early July, we could figure out how to bring people in. But meanwhile, you know what I said at the beginning, you don't want to go into a crisis, one, not knowing who you are and not knowing who your friends are. So I felt very lucky, and I see that in our peers in the arts community here, that we did know who we were. So we just had to figure out how to be that mission, how to serve that in other ways.
Yeah.
And because we live off contributed revenue, it was really good. We knew who our friends were. It was not a period you could go figure out who you were or how to find new people. But that said, for those reasons, we leaned into our mission and we leaned into our relationships because we said, if you already love our mission, we're going to ask you to support it. And we had people say, oh, my job is uncertain, or my priorities are going to shift for a little while. And we said, that's a relationship when you're honest. But we also found so many people said, we get it. You do need us more than ever. We see you fulfilling your mission. And they were there for us. You know, in the bigger question, I think about the arts right now and why I think we've seen the support we've gotten. There are so many enormous problems right now in America. Many we knew were budding: wealth inequality, income inequality, racial inequality. You know, the lid was just torn off of all that. So we have all these big problems, and none of them has an obvious answer. And we're torn apart by politics, by social media, by media. If there was a moment that was invented for artists, it would be now. Because what do? Well, one, they bring people together. The organizations do, but we do it through art. We bring people together to see what an artist has done.
Conversation.
They don't tell us what to think. They let us come and find, at times where things seem unanswerable, we can find an answer. We can just figure out how we feel, which is hard right now, because artists are so open-ended, expansive, generous, and that's what we need. So that's in my thinking about transition, I'm really confident, because if we keep doing that, the world needs what artists are bringing to them more than ever.
What are you most proud of as you look back on as it relates to the social, the social justice and the racial equity work that you all have done?
Well, it goes back to the beginning, because I didn't know how to be a museum director. You know, I was sort of the opposite of an ordinary arts leader. I said, you know, they come in from out of town, they don't know the institution. I knew the institution. They don't know the donors or the town. I knew that, but I didn't know how to run a museum.
Yeah.
So I'm like the flip side of that record. And so I had to watch, and the museum had just reopened a year earlier, and this whole idea of what were we going to be, there wasn't anyone sitting around saying that's not how we do it. So early on, I think that, you know, Fund for the Arts is leading this capacity building program, and Michael Kaiser, the leader, says, you know, you got to start with great art. And that resonated for me because early on we had an exhibit called Southern Accent.
Yeah.
And it addressed,
That was an incredible.
it had about 65 artists addressing the question of what the South meant. It wasn't, some of it was about music and food and kind of the positive sides of Southern culture. But of course some of it was about the history of enslavement and racial violence and the darker side. And there was a work in that exhibit called Unraveling, and a great artist named Sonia Clark, and she took a Confederate flag that was partially unraveled, and it sat there in the galleries, and on the last day she came and she invited people to join her in the unraveling of it.
That gives me goosebumps.
And it did for me, and we stayed open late. You know, the mayor came, it was black people, white people, descendants of people who had owned enslaved people, descendants of people who'd been enslaved. And I sort of all of a sudden thought, okay, this is what artists can do for us, because this, perhaps the most violent symbol in American history, one that tears people apart, was being used to bring them together.
Yeah.
And Sonia invited them. The act all of a sudden became very contemplative, very gentle. It was very slow. You know, in 5 hours they unraveled an inch or two of it. It realized we got here over a long time. It's gonna take a long time to move out of this. But for me, all of a sudden, I thought we can be fearless if we do this through artists, because it's not something I'm telling people what to think or to do. And all of a sudden, with my colleagues, I realized that, you know, we didn't have to decide whether, could we touch on controversial topics or not. We knew we could. And it didn't mean we avoided also just the beauty of art. So when we then had an exhibit of 19th century women who painted in Paris, we showed these gorgeous paintings, our first major painting exhibit since reopening, but we also used it to connect it to the Me Too movement that had budded then. We showed Yinka Shonibari's art and connected to the stories about immigration. And so I just find that, you know, Michael Kaiser says you have to start with great art. I say just don't be afraid of being bold and going right up to the edge of issues that are viewed as complicated and divisive elsewhere. If you do it through artists, you know, you can figure out. Idris Goodwin came while he was still with us in Louisville and led 4 amazing conversations around the work of Ebony Patterson. And that helped me also learn a lesson. My colleague Abby Shue invited him, and we realized, well, we don't have a message, but an artist can bring a message in. So artists interpreting an artist. So the other thing is, you've seen, learning that the Speed is so lucky to be a place that we can, you know, what I say is there's nothing you can't say at the Speed. There's just things that aren't our role to say, but we can invite people to say.
Tell me about the exhibit that is opening and how that came to be. It's an incredible opportunity for the Speed and for Louisville. And I'm just really excited about you all helping the Speed to be that place where this community can tackle these issues.
I'm happy to. And you know, it wouldn't have been possible if we hadn't been trying to do this work in our community outreach, realizing we had to find new ways to open up, new ways to let people criticize us, complain. We had to be transparent and open about where we were, where we wanted to be, where we weren't on issues of racial equity. You know, the work Dean Otto's done with our Speed Cinema in addressing issues of all kinds, complicated issues. So last year, among everything else, we said, well, you know, what the heck is an art museum for? Again, we're not going to vaccinate anybody. We're not going to triage or provide oxygen. We're not going to bring Breonna Taylor's life back. We're not going to solve the deep problems of racial inequity in our country. What can we do?
What can we do?
And when we saw Amy Sherald's portrait of Breonna Taylor, we had a little spark of inspiration. Amy Sherald is globally famous for painting Michelle Obama's official portrait, but Amy Sherald was in that Southern Accent show. She came to the Speed for the opening, so fortunately we knew her. Her painting was our banner on our 3rd Street facade, so I was able to reach out to Amy. Fortunately, there's a big story now that she was already thinking about the role of Louisville and the future of the painting. At first she said she would lend it to us, and then I thought, well, there's one other person we have to ask permission to do this, and that was Tamika Palmer, Breonna Taylor's mother. And those women both had veto power because there was no way we could do it without them. And she was completely supportive and has remained very involved in the project. But then we don't have a contemporary curator. So I had to reach out and use national connections and found our way to an artist, a curator Amy knew named Allison Glenn, who's at Crystal Bridges Museum, but had worked deeply with artists in communities before. She said yes, we're so lucky. And she conceived of an exhibit called Promise, Witness, Remembrance. And so it is about Breonna Taylor, what the city has gone through with a year of protests, but it's this tension between a personal story, a local story, and a national story. So these themes of promises, to the promise of a young life, the promise of a city to protect its people, the promise of the Constitution, these promises aren't always met. How do we witness it when those promises are unmet or unkept? And then how do we remember a life that's been lost, all the lives lost to gun violence, lives lost to COVID in the country? And so Allison had this beautiful vision of that. And then she was joined by our colleague Toya Northington, who's led our community engagement work with a steering committee, leaders from the protest movement, mental health professionals, about how does the Speed even try to get this right?
Absolutely, there's a lot to tackle.
And so they've helped. And her beautiful vision is these themes of promise, witness, remembrance, aren't linear, they're circular because we have to come back to promise. As a community, we feel so stuck, and our job is to help people process what they've gone through the last year, grieve, but then figure out what are we committing ourselves to going forward.
Yeah.
So the exhibit is going to be here April 7th to June 6th, free in every aspect, including parking for everyone. We're adding staff dramatically right now. We're adding hours back to be open Wednesday to Sunday. We hope everyone will come and just find it in people are going to come with so many different opinions about what's happened in Louisville, what's happened nationally. We're not here to tell them this is not a exhibit that has a message about law enforcement. Those are, Allison likes to say there's so many things this exhibit can't do, starting with bringing a life back. Right. There's so many problems it won't solve, but what we can do art. Yeah. I mean, art is what we do, and art can help people figure out what they think and feel.
Yeah. I will say that we do have the opportunity, if you want to send any questions for Stephen or any conversation, you can put that into the chat, so we will certainly...
you may have one.
Oh, here we go.
Just right here, look at that.
Well, let's see. So there's a question that says, does the Speed have events that display undiscovered artists?
It's a great question. Encyclopedic museums like the Speed do not generally do that. Our curators are watching art. Obviously we have, in terms of undiscovered artists, like artists that haven't been exhibited in galleries or maybe other institutions before, very rarely. It does happen. Allison Glenn has chosen the work of 5 Louisville artists who documented the protest movement. One is Tyler Girth, who tragically lost his life, and we're working with his family, but 4 of the others are Black photographers who documented the movement. So that, but that's rare for us, honestly. We show artists through our community engagement process. We do art workshops with organizations like Play Cousins Collective or W.B. Du Bois Academy, and we exhibit their art in the museum. But in our galleries, a museum like the Speeds usually doesn't show artists who haven't sort of found a position, partly because our curators need to figure out how are they part of a national conversation about art. We love it when Louisville artists like Vian Sora, the Iraqi-American artist, we acquired one of her paintings. And it's wonderful to be able to do that when Louisville is delivering artists who are operating at the highest levels of any artist in the country.
So, so Stephen, 4 years. Before that, you had been a board member for many years. You had been a donor, a patron of the Seed. As you think about the last 4 years, what were some of the surprises of moving into that role? You had known the Speed, you had been so involved. What was it different moving into the role that may have either surprised you or maybe delighted you?
Well, there's a story I tell about when I started. I did a lot of one-on-one meetings with just about everybody, and we have so many wonderful security guards who act as gallery attendants. I did those by shift because they with 3 shifts a day. And so in my first meeting with the biggest shift, what I learned about them, not only were they great security guards, great at their jobs, most of them were practicing artists on the side.
Oh, is that right?
And as an outsider at that point, a light bulb went off, and I realized that this is a job they want, and more than anything, this is where they want to be every day. And I'd run, in my work life, I've run nonprofit boards, but in my work life I've run startup companies, I've started. I like to think that people who've worked for me in that life like coming to work every day, but they don't like it as much as people like coming to a mission-driven organization. And that light bulb that went off about being the opportunity to run an organization that people care about that much, who come and make it happen every day. I mean, I don't do it, they do it. That was probably the really big excitement. And the other part, as you've known for a long time, is just, and I have to admit, I think I've been a pretty good board member, but just how hard everybody works. Not just the last year where it's been really tireless, but just in general, people are so deeply committed to a field where no one's making a lot of money. Everyone is staffed not at the levels they'd like to be. It's really inspiring, and I hope boards know that, but to see it from the inside has really moved me a lot.
That's great. What as you think about the role of the Speed in the community, I mean, certainly over the last 4 years, or even over the last couple of decades, the role of the Speed has changed. How do you think about that going forward, and what you hope that the person that steps into your role in the future takes forward?
Yeah. Well, no arts organization thinks it has enough money, and yet I know everyone looks to the Speed and say they have more money than they need. So, but I also think, so I've used that to say we had this amazing new building. Our job was to say yes. And we can't do it enough, but our job was to say, please come perform in the building. Bring in creative mornings 4 times a year. So 300 talented 20-somethings, have a place to come together, and it's our place, and they get to see the Speed. So I think a lot of it is that even arts organizations that don't have the endowment that we have, we need to be really bountiful, because that's the spirit of artists. And I think sometimes, and it's hard, we don't have the resources we want, but I believe that if you start by, the best way to get is to give, and saying yes, inviting people in, it's where our hearts are. I think the support will follow. I think about, we need to model, I don't know why recently I was thinking about it, I was working on a project in West Louisville for a couple of years called the West Louisville Food Port that didn't happen. The Sports and Learning Center has opened there amazingly, and I'm a huge fan of that project, of the Urban Leagues. But I had a neighbor there named Mike White who ran a company called America's Finest Filters. And just recently I was looking, he died sadly, too young. The last text he sent me was something like this. He said, Stephen, we need some time together soon. Whatever I have access to you, I want to make available to you.
Wow, gosh.
And so I think those of us, even on days where we're struggling and think, or we hope we didn't get that grant we wanted, we have something we can give access to others. It's our building, it's our our creativity that we can reach out in the community with. And I think if we exhibit that, which is the spirit of artists, I mean, I say artists may be the most generous people in the world, because all they do is share. They start from nothing, and then they want to share their vision. They're giving us access to their hearts and vision. I think if we can do that, then we'll find a way to thrive.
Do you have thoughts about the role of the arts going forward? But not just in Louisville, but how to make sure that the arts are brought to help solve some of our nation's biggest challenges?
That's a small question. I don't know. I do have that answer. No, I'm really humble about, I just see so many leaders working so hard in the arts. I do think that aiming really, really high. I think the arts have watched aging, so many performing arts worry about the aging base. I think we've seen Teddy Abrams to say, that's not the narrative if we don't let it be the narrative. Let's get out there. Absolutely. I think my colleagues at the Speed are saying, no, that's not. The visual arts is so alive, it's so real, it's what people do need, and people need to come together to see it together. I think if we stay bold and really ambitious, then the future is very bright.
I love that. So I have another question, and this is, what has kept you in Louisville?
Oh God. Well, we can trade answers on that. I chose Louisville as my hometown in 1995. My wife Mr. Louisville, never thought she would move home, so I persuaded her to do it. And it frustrates me at times, but I love what I always loved. I find that Louisville sometimes undersells itself. We're at a moment where we're about to become as beautiful as any city in America when spring hits. I think we undersell our sheer physical beauty. I think the accessibility of all kinds. We have a lot of challenges, but I think we're a city where you can make a difference. You can get involved, and it's just gotten better. So many voices we weren't listening to, and now that we're trying to do better, the sheer explosion of black voices, so much talent here. And I do believe that with all of our challenges, if we just tap into the talent that's already here, the richness, creativity, and brain power here, then it's going to be a great place to stay for the rest of my life. But how about you? You're staying?
I think I would agree. I think Louisville is an incredible place where that we have access to so much, and I think the key is, how do we make sure that we continue to make sure that's open to people in all neighborhoods and to wherever they are. But that's the kind of community we aspire to be. That's the kind of community we can continue to push ourselves to be.
What I say is, we're proud of our reputation as a very welcoming city, and we're very welcoming to outsiders. I think the challenge for us in the next stage is, what if we could become just as welcoming to all of our fellow neighbors, brothers and sisters in Louisville? Imagine what we could do then.
Yeah, absolutely. So Stephen, as we think about, as you're stepping down, what's going to be, the advice that you give to your successor?
Well, I want to get out of their way. You and I've talked about that, but there's a lot of transitions going on in Louisville, and a number of us departing leaders are remaining in Louisville, committed to Louisville. Teresa Reno-Weber, you, me, they're over, and Brian Riendo, there are a lot of us. So it's going to be an interesting moment, because I know that all of us want our successors to do even better than we did, because we know that'll be, one, even selfishly, that'll show that we did a good job, but also that's the goal.
Legacy.
So I think we're trying to figure that out. I want them to bring their own vision, but understand what's great about our community, our institutions, and know that we're here, when they want us, for them, to succeed.
There's some things in the past 4 years that you have helped to make happen that you want to make sure is part of the speed going forward.
It's interesting, because I've been thinking, knowing that I was going to stay longer than I originally planned, but not forever. I've thought a lot about succession, and so our commitment to be serving and engaging the whole community, it's not mine.
Yeah.
It's all of my colleagues. It's 100 people. When they've said to me, how do we know this will continue when I'm gone? I was like, I tell them, it's because you've made it your work. And so the way we've documented that in our exhibits, in the way we've changed our collection, in our program, in our racial equity report, I'm like, no one's disowning that now.
Yeah, you can't go back.
No, and it's, so some of that's a little deliberate as a leader, but it's really to embody what's in the hearts and the work of my amazing colleagues.
Yeah, wow. Thank you for that. I want to first say thank you for the past 4 years.
Well,
thank you for everything you've done in opening up the speed and helping the institution to think about how it shows up in these challenging times, and helping to lead with compassion. We're grateful for that.
Thank you for the fund support. We're happy to. That's a big change. We weren't part of the fund when I started, and now we are. So we're grateful for that.
So now we look to think about how we pass on to the next leaders, and to your point, to how to best support. And also get out of the way.
Yeah.
I want to say thank you to Rabbit Hole, who we're here at Rabbit Hole. Their beautiful facility. We look forward to being able to come together and do this kind of conversation with other people in the room. But Rabbit Hole has generously been our partner in this, and we look forward to that.
And Kaveh Zamanyan, who's built a brand grounded in creativity.
Absolutely.
We love the art here. This art he first saw at the Speed Museum by Louisville's own Kelty Ferris.
Oh, Kelty Ferris.
Yeah, who we love also.
Absolutely.
So, thank you, Rabbit Hole.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Kristen.
Thanks for being here. And tune in next month to have the next great conversation with one of our community's artists, creatives, and innovators.